Hi, I'm Jessa Davis. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm coming to you from Olympia, Washington today. I'm a security consulting manager at Accenture. I'm very excited to be able to share some of my own background and knowledge on blockchain and how it can be applied to cybersecurity issues within the Internet of Energy, smart grid domain, and be able to apply this to some real world solutions, I hope, and give you some use cases to really drive home the purpose of this technology within this space. So before I get into the agenda too deeply, I just wanted to mention sort of as a side note that I used to work as a software developer with the United Nations in Nepal, and I was actually one of the first people to be hired specifically for blockchain-based work. This was in 2017 and 2018, and it was an interesting time for blockchain in particular, good and bad in a lot of ways, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But I built a slide deck, a slide presentation at that time to sort of talk about what can blockchain do within a broader scope of a variety of industries and problems. So what we're going to be doing here today is I'm taking some of that and applying it to the concept of the Internet of Energy and drilling into distributed energy resources in particular. We'll talk about what those technologies are and how we can situate those within the idea of a smart grid overall. And then we'll talk about some cybersecurity challenges, in particular posed by DER integration to the traditional grid model. And from there, we're going to dive into a primer on blockchain. We're going to talk about the technologies in depth. I'm going to be looking at asymmetric cryptography and hash functions and how this all comes together to make a blockchain. And from there, then, we'll look at some specific use cases where blockchain can potentially be a solution for those problems we discussed now that we've equipped you with some knowledge about how blockchains work, what their strengths are, and what their actual purpose is. Along the way, we will talk a bit more about, again, that hype about surrounding blockchain that I think still exists. Part of the reason that I set up a poll for this session, where I wanted a word cloud to look at like what people's impressions of blockchain are, is to see where we stand nowadays, 6 years later. Are we still in the the cryptocurrency bubble where people associate blockchain with cryptocurrencies only? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Can we find a way to apply this technology to real world solutions rather than just get caught up in the mania of the markets, for lack of a better term? So please do go to that poll if you haven't already and throw some words in there. Let me know what you think in terms of what your first impressions are. Did you roll your eyes when you saw blockchain, or was this very intriguing, and why? So you've all read the abstract. The idea here is I want to talk about the Internet of Energy environment in particular and look at how blockchain can be a solution for problems within that space. The reason I'm doing this is because, one, this is where I work in my day job at Accenture. Most of my clients are electric utilities, and DER integration in particular is currently a big problem, and it's going to become more so as electric vehicles become more prevalent within the marketplace and various regulations force consumers into electric vehicles, which I'm very much in favor of, but it does cause problems for the grid that we need to solve. Technical problems outside of cybersecurity, but then there's also cybersecurity problems that come up as well. And that's what we're going to talk about a bit here in terms of defining the Internet of Energy and situating DERs within that overall picture. So, and again, like I said, we will wrap up with some real life use cases where we apply the technologies we talk about, how blockchain comes together to be a solution for this. So here we are with the Internet of Energy. The first time I heard this term, again, I'm very wary of buzzwords. Being a veteran of the cryptocurrency bubble of 2017 and 2018, I found it very embarrassing sometimes to say that I worked on cryptocurrencies and blockchain at that time, just because there were plenty of scams around, and it's given me a healthy dose of skepticism. So my first reaction when I hear a term like Internet of Energy is, why do we need it? Isn't Internet of Things good enough? Um, but I'm going to say here at least that Internet of Energy has some use. It has a place within this discussion, because what we're trying to do here is describe a particular type of Internet of Things, and this is a subset of the Internet of Things then, where we are emphasizing the fact that this is an industrial application. Yes, there's industrial Internet of Things, but this is an industrial application that is disrupting the traditional power grid model, right? And in particular, what we're emphasizing with the term Internet of Energy is the connectivity between stakeholders and devices, applications and services, right? So we have peer-to-peer communication between intelligent devices. We're bringing monitoring and visibility of the data that exists in networks already, and we're gathering that, and we're presenting it to human operators and also to applications that analyze that information and automate certain processes. And also, excuse me, we are trying to manage distributed generation and energy storage within microgrids. You can aggregate microgrids and make virtual power plants. Again, all of these things rely on that connectivity element, And then finally, we're integrating distributed energy generation and demand management technologies as well, things like smart thermostats and other facets of the smart home or smart building or even the smart factory. We're integrating all these things into the grid so that way we can meet supply and demand without the sort of imbalances that, well, I used to live in Texas, and I lived in Texas during the big power outage we had in 2021. Those sorts of things, those sorts of risks of a lack of resiliency because of the way the traditional grid works. And now we're integrating these elements into it. This connectivity element is key. So yes, we do have an Internet of Energy. On the next slide, we'll talk a bit about smart grid. What I'll just say is these terms are not really formally defined at this point, and they're sort of just generalizations, right? So there's Internet of Energy is a concept that is driving home the fact that we have communication going in two different directions rather than the more hierarchical model of the traditional power grid. So all these outcomes, then, what we're trying to achieve are to increase grid resiliency, to respond to outages faster, to be able to meet demand before it causes any kind of brownouts or rolling blackouts. We want to improve transmission and distribution efficiencies, not just to meet consumer demand, but also to lower operational costs. And we want to optimize that demand response as well, sort of as a package there to, take in what these distributed resources are generating and send it to where we need it to go within the grid overall. Or how can we store it for another day as well? We want to reduce consumer energy costs through all these efficiencies and optimization of demand response and grid resiliency. All of these things are cost reduction elements for the operators that hopefully trickle down to the consumer in the form of reduced energy costs. And all of these things are serving general goals held by every utility in the US and Canada in particular, but around the globe in various countries. Everyone's trying to get to a more sustainable energy supply. They're trying to decarbonize their generation and be very renewable forward. But again, like I started off this slide with saying, is this introduces as many problems as it solves, right? So we move forward to talk about the smart grid. You can see over here the graphic on the right. The grid of yesterday, we have large power plants, centralized, national, regional, or state level organization with power lines and pipelines of energy. I don't know why they have pipelines in there because we're talking about electricity in particular, but we'll talk about pipeline figuratively. You know, very top to bottom, one way, right? One way from generation to transmission to distribution down to the consumer. Now, we do mention markets in there, you can see. You know, in the last 20, 30 years, there's been some deregulation of markets, so where a marketing function is separate from the generation or the transmission and distribution portions of various energy companies. But even with that being the case, in the grid of yesterday, that market is still defined by that natural monopoly mindset that dominated the utilities market for so many decades, right? And what we see with the smart grid is we have small power producers along with the big power plants, right? We're blurring the lines between generation, transmission, and distribution, where generation exists on the distribution side of the grid, and distribution grids kind of become transmission grids, where we're sending power back from one place to another place. Also, it's not just energy. Again, remember, this is information flowing in two different ways, and also potentially payments. We're not quite there yet. Blockchain, I think, is an important solution to some of this, but just bear in mind, it used to be one way, and they'd send you a bill at the end of the month. Now we've got these back and forth flows, right? We have small scale transmission, and we have active participating consumers slash producers. Sometimes they're called prosumers, right? So the smart grid is composed of cyber physical systems, legacy systems that for most of my career as a controls engineer, I've worked on these mostly in oil and gas, but it's the same concept on the electric utility side. These are largely quote unquote air gapped systems, PLCs, HMIs, RTUs. We're talking SCADA systems here. These cyber physical systems are not going away. What's happening is these are being augmented and more deeply integrated into smart networks that are even more and more connected beyond just the company enterprise network. And we're bridging that gap between the IT/OT divide, as it's sometimes referred to, and bringing all of this into one domain, where now we've got the big power plants and the small power producers. We have control systems there, but we also have advanced metering infrastructure. We have IoT, 5G and fiber broadband, edge computing. These things are very much a core component of, again, that connectivity element. And I put in here, you know, in parentheses, and cloud, because we could be there, we're almost there. Again, because of the nature of CPS, they're very averse to the idea of getting into the cloud, but that's coming. Distributed energy resources are part of the smart grid. Energy efficient loads, again, like I mentioned, smart thermostats, and we have smart homes and smart buildings and every other little component that goes together to build things like building automation systems and how they can support renewable energy goals and sustainability goals, right? So the smart grid is any intelligent device put on a network to help support the functioning of the grid. But in doing so, again, we've blurred these lines. We've not necessarily inverted the hierarchy, but we've definitely made things less of a one-way street, okay? So this is a big, big domain of information here. We are going to focus in particular on distributed energy resources because, again, DER integration is a big problem for the near future, and there are certain regulatory and market initiatives occurring all at the same time that are driving the need to solve this problem in particular. All right, so we'll advance to the next slide here and talk about what are distributed energy resources. Okay, these are technologies for generating or storing energy, things that we know of, like photovoltaics, wind turbines, micro wind turbines, or the big ones that we all see, depending on where you live, batteries and other types of storage technologies, fuel cells, electric vehicles, and EV charging infrastructure. You know, electric vehicles are essentially a mobile battery, but they are, you know, they could be used for more than just powering the vehicle. It could be for distributing energy back onto the grid from that storage technology. And the EV charging infrastructure itself is also a set of devices that need to be considered not only from a smart grid perspective, but especially from a cybersecurity perspective. But we can't think just green energy. Backup generators for hospitals, any other building that might have this sort of diesel, gasoline, or natural gas backup generation is a distributed energy resource that could potentially be managed by the grid and maybe could possibly, if it could be sold from behind the meter back onto the grid, then we need to worry about integrating it into the grid as well. The utility needs visibility into what that device is generating and putting back onto the grid. Same thing with cogeneration, which is combined heat and power, where you have, say, like a big, you know, generation system that could be creating electricity and using the byproduct, which is heat, to say run a heating system for a building or vice versa. Very interesting technologies. Not all of them are quote unquote green. It's about small scale, and it's about what exists out there on the distribution network that can make energy rather than just consume energy. So all these devices are out. There's a bit of a jump here in me talking because I had slight technical difficulty. So I'll just continue here, where looking at cybersecurity challenges, DR integration. First big one, when you think about PV systems, wind turbines, batteries, electric vehicles out there in the wild, existing independent of the grid, as we bring these in to the grid control system and allow utilities to see what's being generated and what's being fed back onto the grid with excess generation or stored energy that's being brought online at a later point to meet that demand, we have these things called DER aggregators. They're not required. You could have DERs talking directly to utility. And if this was a talk about DERs, we'd be going into the different communication protocols that facilitate the creation of this Internet of Energy. But for here, suffice it to say that there's aggregators, and then there's DERs that talk directly to the utilities, or the aggregators are talking on their behalf. And these aggregators can be talking to thousands of devices, maybe even more, right? So they in particular are a critical point where an attacker might target aggregators to either inject malicious data onto the grid or to send malicious commands out to the DERs, because these control and communication protocols that are being developed currently to manage DERs require the ability to send a disconnect command, for instance, and you could potentially send a disconnect command to a set of devices that absolutely need to be connected in this very moment. I mentioned Texas earlier. Texas leads the country, at least at last stats I saw, in wind and solar generation. And this summer in particular was a very hot summer, but as a consequence of being a very hot summer, it was also a very sunny summer. And the solar and wind capacity of the Texas grid helped keep the supply just ahead of demand. Some days it was very, very close, but if a malicious actor were able to take off an entire PV facility in West Texas at the right time, it could send the entire Texas grid into a domino effect of complete collapse, essentially, in a worst case scenario. In addition to those sort of vulnerabilities of a malicious actor hacking or injecting data, in that same scenario, we could also talk about man-in-the-middle attacks where we're intercepting sensitive data like payment information or identity information, which again, blockchain will help us solve. Moving on from that, though, we could be talking about the software and hardware of DERs and how, these are now being included in controls environments which prioritize safety and reliability. And we have developers and engineers creating products with a different mindset, perhaps, who aren't really from a background like I am, where I've written controls programs for pipelines and various other gas production and facilities, where I've had to think about what happens if this fails. How do I stop the entire facility from going up in flames? How do I prevent people from being hurt who work for the, in my case, pipeline, but in this case it would be the electric utility? How do I ensure that the public is also safe, right? So there's different priorities when it comes to the IT world versus the OT world. And similarly, we have a lot of legacy CPS systems out there that are insecure by design. They're certainly not secure by design, but at least they exist behind an air gap, or in theory they do. There's some sort of an effort to keep these devices separate from the internet, but DERs are often coming into these utilities through these DER aggregators or into a gateway from the internet. They are designed to be connected, but they are also insecure by design, or at least not secure by design. In addition, we have privacy concerns when it comes to cryptocurrency. Excuse me, when it comes to cybersecurity for DER integration. I don't know where cryptocurrency came from. It's like on my brain. Um, and we're talking about, the data that's being sent back and forth. Could we create a consumer profile? Could we be potentially leaking sensitive data about that consumer to a rogue device on the network? Because since this is a peer-to-peer network, we don't really know who's on there. Also, physical security is a concern. This one's harder for blockchain to solve, but there are some ways that blockchain can. All right. But it is very difficult because these are on houses. These are out in the middle of nowhere. They're in publicly accessible areas. It's a big challenge. So from here, we're going to talk about the main event, right? So this is blockchain. What is it? What are we talking about it for in the context of electric utilities? So what I'll say to start off, the way I describe blockchains is they are just a fancy database, right? They're a database that have the ability to protect data integrity and confidentiality. They can be used to provide identities for users and authorize rights for users or machines or services and applications. They can facilitate non-repudiation of contracts and agreements, and they can increase the transparency of organizational processes through a variety of different means. How does this all come together, though? How does a database do this, right? So blockchains, or we can refer to them as distributed ledger technology, DLT, that's an acronym you'll see occasionally. They are a peer-to-peer network. They are composed of nodes that are running node application software. And this distributed ledger is a shared source of truth, right? So this is the fancy database part, right? It's simply a database that exists on all these various nodes, and all these nodes agree that the information in the database that they collectively hold is correct and true. And the way this is maintained and managed is through a consensus algorithm that controls write access to the ledger. And then also, a blockchain will typically include a virtual machine, which will capture machine state. It will take various inputs from users or applications to execute smart contracts. So we'll talk about asymmetric cryptography here, and how we have these functions on blockchains to encrypt and decrypt messages, just like between Bob and Alice, which if you've studied cryptography at all, you might be familiar with Bob and Alice. They always have a lot to say to each other. And in the first graphic on the left, Bob wants to encrypt a message that only Alice can read. And asymmetric cryptography is a very ingenious way to allow this to be done without the exchange of a shared key. You can flip that interaction, however, and Alice can sign a message to Bob with her private key that then can be verified with Alice's public key. So in both of these scenarios, what we have happening is Bob, in the first one, Bob is encrypting a message with Alice's public key that only Alice can unlock with her private key. And then Alice is digitally signing a message with her private key that anyone who has her public key can check to see whether Alice actually signed that, right? We have these two key pairs within asymmetric cryptography, and they can be used to encrypt and decrypt and to digitally sign messages, documents, contracts, whatever it may be. Within DLT applications, for those of you who are familiar with cryptocurrency, you have a wallet, and then you have a password typically, or a private key. The password might be protecting the key, but ultimately it's the same exact concept. Your wallet address is your public key, and your private key is what you use to authorize payment from your wallet, to authenticate who you are, to sign a smart contract, or to interact with other blockchain applications. And another element here that we have is hash functions, which will be the first element of how we build these blocks of a blockchain. Right, so a hash function is a one-way cipher. You put a message in, and a bunch of numbers and letters pop out on the other side. The hash is a fixed length, and each message, no matter how short or long, is converted into that fixed length bit string. And basically what that can be used for is something like a checksum for a software download to make sure that what you've downloaded is what the software publisher has provided to the public without anything additional being added or removed. You could verify, for instance, we'll look at this message cryptography is fun and say, if I say that I wanted to send you that message and I gave you the hash, you could verify whether that is true by hashing that same message and comparing the two strings of numbers. You can see that just changing the capital C to a lowercase c dramatically changes the output of the hash. So what we don't know without me telling us here, in this particular example, what the input string was. But if we have it, we can compare it to see if it's valid or not, or if something's been modified or changed. Another important element of a blockchain is, like we discussed previously, the consensus algorithm. It's what makes this distributed ledger possible, and it controls how a node can gain write access to the network and to that shared source of truth. We're not going to talk about what goes into consensus algorithms because it's a lot, but just be aware that there's things called proof of work, proof of stake, proof of authority. It goes on and on. Proof of elapsed time, is a cute acronym for POET. All of these algorithms determine who gets to write the next block. So when we add a block, what we're doing is a node gets permission, and it writes that block, and all the other nodes go, yes, you had permission, this is the block, this is correct, this is true. Each block contains a hash of the block that came before it as part of that block. And then the next block that comes is going to have a hash of that block, and so on and so forth. And looking at the hash functions here, what you can see is if I go back and try to forge a particular block and say, no, my Bitcoin wallet has 1 million Bitcoin, I'm going to also have to change every block that came after it, because the information in that block is hashed and contained in the next block. And if I change the hash of that block, then the value of that next block is going to be changed, which makes the hash in the next block invalid, and so on and so forth. So even the smallest little change to the contents of any one block changes those hash values of every block following it, right? And that's why we have a chain of blocks, for that specific reason. That's what makes hacking a blockchain very difficult, if not impossible, for in certain circumstances. It can be done, and that's a whole other conversation. But those are the mechanics of a blockchain. The last thing I'll say about blockchains is we have to ask ourselves, what do we need, right? Do we need to capture state? Do we have multiple people writing to this database? If that's not true, then maybe you just need an Excel spreadsheet or some other kind of database. Do you have a trusted third party available to you? Are all the writers known? Are they all trusted? And do we need to verify who these people are, right? I mean, we don't need to verify the identity or trust people who post, to a message board online, because we're not relying on that information to make operational decisions, right? But within certain circumstances, like say uh, a supply chain situation where we have multiple parties involved, they may not trust each other, or they may need a trusted third party to mediate contracts or inventories or payments. So blockchains can be useful for this. And I will say that if you want to dive into this more, the question of public versus private and permissioned versus permissionless blockchains is also sort of outside of our scope right here, unfortunately. So I'll just say, please Google that if you're interested, but just understand that blockchains are not a solution for everybody. I've seen a lot of organizations want their own internal private blockchain, and again, it's a fancy database. Maybe you just need a database. Within the context of the Internet of Energy and the problem of integrating DERs, we have multiple stakeholders involved. And they don't necessarily trust each other. We don't even know who they are at times. These DERs can join a network and leave. They can be commissioned or decommissioned. If I were to install solar panels on my roof, now I'm part of the grid, right? And no one had to like verify who I was to install those panels, but here I am, right? So how do we manage all of these questions of trust and identification within the context of the cybersecurity problems that I highlighted above? Well, we have a couple use cases that we can provide here as I wrap up. We could be using blockchain as an identity provider. Self-sovereign digital identity is a thing that you can really geek out on, but from just a very basic perspective, what we're trying to do here is put the identity in the user's control, right? So I've got a passport, it's issued by the State Department. I have a driver's license, it's issued by my state DMV. I have a social security card issued by the Social Security Administration. These ID components that I use in my life for various reasons are issued by different central third parties who have verified who I am and issue me this document as a way of proving who I am. But once we get into Web 2.0 and Web 3.0 technologies, we have a problem of identity sprawl, where now I have hundreds and hundreds of accounts at various websites and services and applications. How do I keep them all up to date? How do I keep them, to make sure that the ones that I need are maintained, and that I'm not potentially leaving sensitive information on some website I logged into once where I had to create an account. We also have privacy concerns stemming from that, where, not just identity theft, but just the disclosure of potentially sensitive information of a variety of forms, including something as maybe seemingly innocuous as energy usage at my house. But with that data, you could probably figure out patterns around when I'm home, what I do when I'm home, when am I gone. All of that can be used for commercial purposes or potentially nefarious purposes. And maybe I don't want to disclose that, but I still want to participate in the Internet of Energy as a prosumer with solar panels on my roof. Machine identity management is another very important one. Within the Internet of Things, and especially within the Internet of Energy, we have machines talking to machines. We need to make sure that we authenticate these machines as they're talking to each other. We benefit from an immutable record on the blockchain of the identity lifecycle of each of these devices. So we get to say, we know where device A was at this point in time and what it was communicating to the grid. And we've identified an imposter over here that was pretending to be device A. Similarly, public key infrastructure management is something that is obviously used on regular Web 2.0 technologies to verify identity and the validity of sources. Blockchain can provide an additional layer of information and security We're talking about provisioning, verifying, and auditing private keys for DER devices from the manufacturing facility to when it's being installed and handed over to the owner, and when it's communicating with a DER aggregator and or ultimately the electric utility. We can introduce an extra level of security because there's plenty of opportunities for that whole supply chain for those keys to be tampered with, stolen, or otherwise compromised. And then finally, smart contracts again. We can be facilitating automated execution of agreements between all of these various parties. Generation, transmission, distribution, marketing, consumers, prosumers. We'd be talking about microgrids, community solar, virtual power plants that are optimizing their excess generation onto the grid to earn a little extra money, electric vehicles parked in a parking lot where you can use it as an energy storage solution for the grid and get compensated for that. Smart contracts are a great way to manage, again, all of these unknown and untrusted parties to manage payments, energy production and storage, and even escrow contracts. And I've gone a bit over time. I apologize for that. But I just want to sum it all up by saying the Internet of Energy, we're talking about bidirectional flows of energy, information, and payments. I didn't emphasize payments so much in this presentation because I want to stay away from the cryptocurrency hype and talk about what blockchain can actually do outside of fintech. So in disrupting the traditional grid structure, we're bringing in localized and decentralized communications, and there's a lack of trust, a lack of security, and blockchain, especially for the DER integration problems we've discussed here, can provide some solutions for that in terms of being an identity provider for users, machines. Also, we can do PKI management and deploy smart contracts to automate the execution of various agreements between all of these stakeholders within the Internet of Energy. So with that, I'll say thank you for bearing with me. Don't have any time for Q&A, but I will say reach out to me on LinkedIn. You've got my information there. I'd be happy to answer any questions or hear your thoughts. And with that, have a great day.